Guests laughed and clinked champagne glasses as they awaited the union of Daniel Ruiz, 26, and his bride-to-be, Angela Martinez, a stunning and mysterious 28-year-old woman who had entered Daniel's life just 1 year ago and quickly captured everyone's attention. Everyone, that is, except Daniel's mother. To most, Angela was a charming woman. Slender, graceful, with porcelain skin and deep brown eyes. She worked at a local animal shelter and had volunteered at several charity events. Most of Daniel's friends saw her as the ideal partner. Elegant, quiet, always smiling, but rarely speaking about her past. To Helen Ruiz, Angela was an enigma. There was something off. It wasn't just the way she avoided talking about childhood or how Daniel never met her parents. It wasn't even the odd glances Helen caught when Angela thought no one was watching. No, it was a mother's intuition. And Helen, a 54-year-old retired Army sergeant, trusted her gut. Still, Helen tried to push the feeling aside. She didn't want to be the mother who ruined her only son's big day. But everything would change in less than 12 hours. Helen Ruiz had always been protective, perhaps too much. As a single mother raising Daniel in a tough El Paso neighborhood, she taught him how to be strong, self-reliant, and wary of charmers. Daniel had grown into a kind, intelligent young man with dreams of owning a business and settling down. But when Angela appeared in his life, everything changed. Fast. Too fast. They met at a small coffee shop where Angela worked part-time while volunteering with a local pet adoption center. Daniel said she smiled at him over a caramel macchiato. By the second date, they were inseparable. 3 months in, they moved in together. At 6 months, he proposed. Helen's radar pinged almost immediately. Angela was polite, too polite. Always composed, never vulnerable. She never spoke about her own mother, never mentioned a father, never brought up childhood memories. And when Helen once asked about siblings during a Thanksgiving dinner, Angela replied with a rehearsed line, "I was an only child. My parents are both gone now. It's just me." But there was no sadness in her voice, no pause, no flicker in her eyes. Helen let it go then, but never truly forgot. The week of the wedding, Helen dug deeper. Not out of hatred, out of fear. Her son was marrying someone she barely knew. She tried talking to Daniel. "Have you met her family? Why isn't anyone coming from her side?" "They're dead, Mom," Daniel had snapped. "Why do you always have to push?" Push she did. Helen searched online. There were no death records for Angela's supposed parents. No high school yearbooks from El Paso, San Antonio, or Austin featuring an Angela Martinez that matched her photo. No social media. Not even a driver's license entry, according to an old friend Helen had at the DMV. Something didn't add up. Helen grew more disturbed when she opened Angela's bridal suite closet the night before the wedding, looking for a steamer to press her son's tux, and found a prescription bottle tucked behind a makeup case. It had a name Helen didn't recognize, Antonio M. Lopez. Testosterone blockers. Helen froze. The bottle was half full. The prescription had been issued 6 months ago in Austin. She scanned the bottle again. The dosage, the patient name, the refill schedule, it all told her something she never imagined. Angela had been born a man? Helen's hands trembled as she put the bottle back where she found it. Her mind raced. This wasn't just deception. In her mind, it was a violation. A betrayal. Her son, her flesh and blood, had been kept in the dark. Hadn't he? For the first time in her life, Helen Ruiz didn't know what to do. She didn't sleep that night. Helen spent the entire night tossing and turning, her mind spiraling deeper into suspicion and dread. The bottle, the label, the name Antonio M. Lopez burned into her thoughts. She felt sick to her stomach, but part of her clung to the hope that she was overreacting. Maybe Angela had a relative living with her. Maybe it was someone else's prescription. But deep down, she knew. Her instincts had been whispering the truth for months. Now they were screaming. At 6:15 a.m. on the morning of the wedding, Helen left her hotel room and drove to the address listed on the prescription bottle. It was a small clinic in downtown Austin, about an 8-hour round trip. She had just enough time before the 4 p.m. ceremony. She arrived at the Sunrise Endocrinology Center at 10:42 a.m. The receptionist greeted her kindly, but Helen wasn't there to be friendly. "I'm here to confirm something about a patient, Antonio Lopez. I believe there's been a mistake." The receptionist gave her a neutral look. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't share patient information." Helen pulled out a folded piece of paper with Angela's photo printed on it. "Please, my son is marrying this person today. If there's something I need to know, I'm begging you." The woman behind the counter hesitated. For a long second, there was silence. Just the whir of the ceiling fan and the buzz of a printer nearby. Then, with a glance to the hallway, the receptionist whispered, "You didn't hear this from me, but you're not wrong." Helen's breath left her body. The woman leaned in. "Antonio transitioned 7 years ago. Started treatment here. Name legally changed 2 years later. I can't tell you anything else." Helen stood there, stunned, gripping the edge of the counter. Her suspicions were true. Angela wasn't just hiding a piece of her past. She was living under a different identity. By the time Helen got back in the car, her knuckles were white around the steering wheel. She drove back to El Paso in silence. No music, no calls, just the sound of tires over concrete and the escalating beat of her pulse. She felt something shift inside her. Not just anger, rage, betrayal. She believed her son was being tricked into a life based on lies. She thought about how she'd raised him, protected him, fought for him. And now she believed someone was making a fool of him. Helen Ruiz made a decision somewhere between mile marker 168 and 169 on I-10. By the time she pulled into the church parking lot at 3:37 p.m., she had a small black pistol tucked inside her purse, just in case. The Ruiz family was known throughout the neighborhood, respectable, tight-knit, and deeply traditional. The wedding of Daniel Ruiz had been the talk of the community for months. Family and friends traveled from across the state to attend. White tents fluttered in the garden breeze. A mariachi band played softly, and dozens of guests took their seats with anticipation. But no one knew what was about to happen. No one noticed Helen Ruiz's tight jaw, the way she clutched her small handbag, or how her eyes scanned the scene like a soldier surveying a battlefield. Inside the bridal suite, Angela sat before a vanity mirror, her makeup flawless. Her best friend and maid of honor, Tasha, adjusted the train of her dress. "You look incredible," Tasha whispered. "I just want everything to go right," Angela said softly, her voice distant. "It will," Tasha reassured her. "He loves you. They'll all love you." Angela nodded, but she didn't quite believe it. Not entirely. She had always known the day would come when her past might catch up to her. She had rehearsed the moment, told herself that honesty would come in time. Just not before the wedding. Just not before she was safely his. Downstairs, Daniel stood nervously by the altar, adjusting his tie. His groomsmen flanked him, joking to ease the tension. "You look like you're about to pass out, man. That obvious?" Daniel chuckled. I can't believe she picked me." His heart was pounding, not from fear, but from love. Angela had changed his life. She was soft where he was impulsive, calm where he was anxious. She understood him in ways no one ever had. He'd never once doubted her. Not until that day. Not until a strange look from his mother sent a chill down his spine. Helen sat in the front pew motionless. She hadn't spoken to Daniel since returning from Austin. She hadn't slept. She hadn't cried. Her eyes were fixed on the altar, her hands resting on her handbag, fingers brushing over the cold steel hidden inside. The organ began to play. Everyone stood. Angela appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in her white gown. Gasps of admiration rippled through the crowd. Daniel's face lit up, his eyes shimmering with emotion. But Helen saw nothing but lies wrapped in silk. As Angela walked slowly toward the altar, Helen whispered under her breath, "He doesn't know. You never gave him the chance to know." Angela reached Daniel. He took her hands, shaking with nerves. The priest began. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Helen stood. Heads turned. Even the priest paused, startled. I'm sorry, Helen said, stepping into the aisle. But I can't let this happen. Daniel blinked. Mom, what are you doing? Angela looked confused, then frightened. Helen reached into her bag. Gasps erupted. She's lying to you, Daniel. She's not who you think she is, Helen said, voice rising, trembling with rage. Her name is Antonio Lopez. Angela's mouth opened in horror. Daniel stepped forward. What are you talking about? Angela reached for Daniel, eyes pleading. I was going to tell you. I needed more time. I love you. That hasn't changed. Helen pulled the gun out. Screams broke across the garden. Chairs toppled as guests ducked or scattered. The priest backed away, frozen in place. You tricked my son? Helen cried, tears now spilling down her cheeks. You made a fool of him, and you thought I'd stay quiet. Angela raised both hands. Please, Helen, I love him. I never meant to hurt. A shot rang out. The bouquet dropped from Angela's hand as her body jerked backward. Blood bloomed across the front of her white gown like an obscene flower. She collapsed in Daniel's arms. Panic erupted. The crowd scattered. Daniel screamed, holding Angela's lifeless body, his white suit soaked red. Helen stood motionless, the pistol still in her hand. Her eyes didn't blink. Her hands didn't tremble. She was no longer a mother. She was a woman possessed by something deeper, something darker. When the police arrived minutes later, Helen Ruiz surrendered without resistance. She never said another word. Not on the drive to the station, not during the questioning, not even to her son. The wedding was over, but the horror had only just begun. The church courtyard, once filled with joy and laughter, now echoed only with sobs, sirens, and the disjointed cries of shocked wedding guests. Angela's body lay motionless, her white gown soaked in crimson. Daniel knelt beside her, screaming her name, shaking her, willing her to come back. But her eyes were glassy, wide open, her final expression frozen in a mixture of shock, pain, and heartbreak. It had all happened so fast. One moment, he was standing at the altar, watching the love of his life walk toward him. The next, she was dying in his arms, shot by the one woman he had trusted most. His own mother. Daniel couldn't process it, couldn't breathe, couldn't understand. He was still holding Angela when the paramedics arrived and gently pried her from his arms. The crowd had mostly cleared, but a few guests remained, rooted in place by shock. His best friend, Marco, tried to lead him away, but Daniel didn't budge. His hands were shaking, his mind a mess of fragments. The gunshot, his mother's voice, Angela's last breath. Helen, meanwhile, stood silently by the altar steps, her hands cuffed behind her back, surrounded by officers. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. When asked why she did it, she said only, he had the right to know. She gave him no choice. But the world saw it differently. By the time the story hit local news that evening, headlines screamed in bold letters. Mother shoots son's bride at altar after discovering transgender identity. Wedding turns deadly in El Paso. Bride gunned down by future mother-in-law in shocking act of hate. The tragedy made national news overnight. TV anchors debated issues of trans identity, parental control, and religious intolerance. Some outlets framed Helen as a conservative woman driven to madness by betrayal. Others painted her as a calculated bigot who couldn't bear to let her son live his own life. But to Daniel, none of the labels mattered. Angela was gone. And now, he was caught between grief and a tidal wave of revelations that unraveled everything he thought he knew. Within days, detectives began piecing together the chain of events. Angela, born Antonio Manuel Lopez, had begun her gender transition at the age of 23. She had moved to Austin shortly after beginning hormone therapy and lived quietly, avoiding contact with her estranged family. According to her medical records and legal paperwork, she had completed every necessary step for a legal gender transition, name change, hormone therapy, psychological evaluations. There were no criminal records, no red flags, no history of deception beyond what some called her withholding of past identity. Tasha, Angela's best friend, later gave a public statement. Angela planned to tell Daniel after the honeymoon. She was scared, not of him, never of him, but of people like Helen. She wanted a future without judgment. She wanted love to be enough. Daniel was shattered. As he sat in the quiet of his apartment just days after the tragedy, surrounded by unopened wedding gifts and sympathy cards, he tried to replay every moment with Angela. He thought about the nights they had stayed up talking about their future. He remembered how she cried when she told him she had always felt like an outsider. He had assumed she meant loneliness, not this. And then he remembered something else. One night, months ago, she had tried to tell him something important. She had cried, shaken, and said, "There's something I should tell you, about who I used to be." But he had cut her off with a kiss, whispered, "It doesn't matter. All that matters is who you are now." Now he realized what she had tried to do, and what he had unknowingly denied her. In jail, Helen remained cold and unyielding. She refused to speak to her attorneys beyond minimal responses. When asked if she regretted what she'd done, she only said, "I saved my son." She showed no remorse in court during her arraignment. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, LGBTQ+ rights advocates on one side, a handful of Helen's supporters on the other. The trial date was set, and the prosecution made it clear. They were pursuing the maximum penalty, first-degree murder. Daniel did not attend the arraignment. He couldn't face her. Not yet. But he watched the footage later, shaking with rage. Angela's funeral was held in a modest chapel just outside of Austin, attended by friends, allies, and strangers who had been touched by her story. Her coffin was white, draped in lilies, and her headstone read, "Angela M. Ruiz. She lived in truth. She died in love." Daniel gave a eulogy, one that silenced every voice in the room. "She was the bravest person I ever knew. She taught me love doesn't live in what we hide. It lives in what we share. I failed her. My mother killed her. But I will not let her die in vain." His voice cracked. His eyes were wet. Angela was not a lie. She was my truth. The courtroom was filled to capacity on the morning the trial began. Reporters packed the gallery. Cameras stood like sentinels outside the courthouse, beaming updates to viewers around the country. What had started as a local tragedy had become a national debate, and Helen Ruiz was now the symbol of that rage, judgment, and controversy. The charge: first-degree murder with special circumstances. The victim: Angela Ruiz, born Antonio Lopez. The accused: Helen Ruiz, 56, mother, former church volunteer, and the woman who pulled the trigger in front of over 100 wedding guests. Everyone knew the facts. Helen had shot Angela at the altar. There were dozens of witnesses. There were video recordings. There was no mystery about what had happened. But the trial would be about why and whether it mattered. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Carla Moreno, stood before the jury with confidence and clarity. Her voice was steady, purposeful. This was not a crime of passion. This was premeditated, calculated, cold. Helen Ruiz traveled to Austin under the pretense of a family visit. Instead, she went there to find Angela's past, to find ammunition. When she discovered Angela had transitioned, she made a choice. Not to talk, not to confront, not to warn, but to kill. And she carried out that choice at the moment that would cause the most pain. Her son's wedding day. The defense, led by public defender James Whitmore, took a different route. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case of emotional collapse. A mother's instinct, warped by fear, faith, and betrayal. Helen Ruiz was not in her right mind. She believed she was protecting her son from a deception she saw as unforgivable. We are not saying what she did was right. We are saying it was the tragic act of a disturbed, confused, and deeply broken woman. The courtroom buzzed. The tone was set. Daniel Ruiz was the first major witness. He took the stand with visible exhaustion. His eyes were hollow, his voice thin. But when asked to recount the events of that day, he didn't hesitate. She walked down the aisle. We were about to be married. And then my mother stood up. She said Angela's name wasn't real, that she was a man. And then she shot her. The courtroom was silent. The defense tried to paint Angela as secretive, implying that Daniel had a right to know and that Helen acted in that interest. Daniel, visibly shaking, responded, "She didn't kill Angela because she was protecting me. She killed her because she couldn't stand the truth. She hated that Angela didn't fit into her world." When Tasha Green, Angela's best friend, took the stand, her voice cracked as she recalled conversations about Angela's fear of rejection. Angela knew Daniel deserved the truth. She just wanted time. She was terrified of how his mother would react. And she was right to be. One of the most damning moments came when the prosecution introduced text messages Helen had sent to her church group just days before the wedding. One message read, "My son is being deceived. This woman is no woman. He's going to marry something disgusting. I won't let it happen. God help me." The courtroom gasped. The defense leaned heavily into temporary insanity, introducing a psychiatrist who testified that Helen had suffered a psychological breakdown upon discovering Angela's gender history. She experienced a moral panic, the psychiatrist explained. Her traditional beliefs clashed violently with what she learned. She entered a dissociative state. But the prosecution wasn't moved. DA Moreno countered, "If she was truly dissociated, why bring a gun? Why sit through the ceremony? Why wait until Angela walked down the aisle?" She then introduced security footage from a gas station where Helen had stopped hours before the wedding. In the video, Helen was calm, lucid, even buying a pack of gum and smiling at the clerk. "That is not a woman out of her mind," Moreno said. "That is a woman preparing to do something unthinkable." The hate crime enhancement was formally introduced, based on the texts, her online searches, "Can you stop a transgender wedding?" and her statements to police after her arrest. After a 3-week trial, with more than 20 witnesses and mountains of evidence, the jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. They returned with a verdict on a warm Friday afternoon. The courtroom fell silent as the foreperson stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Helen Ruiz, guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. There were no cheers, only tears. Helen showed no emotion. She did not cry, did not speak. She merely lowered her eyes and closed them. Daniel wept quietly in the second row. 1 month later, Helen Ruiz was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In her final statement before sentencing, she stood and spoke clearly. "I did what I thought was right. If that makes me a criminal, then so be it. I lost my son the day he fell for a lie. I will not apologize for trying to save him." Daniel rose from his seat, looked at her one last time, and said only, "You didn't lose your son. You murdered the woman he loved. And you murdered the mother of the life we were going to build." The courtroom was quiet, but the world outside it was anything but. Helen Ruiz had been sentenced to life in prison without parole for the first-degree murder of Angela Ruiz, a trans woman who had finally found love and was gunned down by her fiancé's mother on her wedding day. But as the gavel came down and Helen was led away in cuffs, the ripple effect of her actions was only beginning. What followed was a storm, one that swept across news outlets, talk shows, universities, religious institutions, LGBTQ+ advocacy groups, and even into Congress. This wasn't just about one murder anymore. It had become a national reckoning. In the weeks after the sentencing, Daniel Ruiz vanished from public view. He left his job, closed his social media accounts, moved out of the apartment he had shared with Angela and back into his father's small home in Corpus Christi. The same house where Helen once sewed curtains and baked on Sundays. Now a hollow shell filled with silence and shame. Friends said he barely spoke. Reporters camped outside, but he offered no interviews. In one rare statement emailed to a local journalist, he wrote, "The woman I loved was taken from me in the most violent, hateful way imaginable. Not by a stranger, not by fate, but by my own mother. I don't know how to move forward, but I know I will never forgive her." His father, Jorge Ruiz, kept even quieter, stunned by the family collapse. He had not supported Daniel's relationship at first, but he never imagined it would come to this. Some said he had become a ghost himself, ashamed, broken, and unsure how to speak to his only son again.